Yeah, we did one per.
I know we're, excuse me. Is it safe to start over, Amy? Thank you. We're going to call the meeting to order. I think we're missing one packet for a board member, but that's coming down here shortly. I believe everyone else has the agenda in front of them. And we'll go ahead and start. We do have an hour for this work session. You were given a lot of background information and reminder and review information. I'm certainly not going to read that for everyone or go over it in depth, but any questions that you may have, please feel free to ask. What you have before you are proposals, recommendations based on policy BJ, and basically this was provided to just help all of us go over the same process we've done the last couple years. Briefly, you have before you the executive summary of our legislative program. You also have policy BJ, and under number 4 of policy BJ, we will be discussing our legislative program. We'll be establishing legislative core values to serve as a guide for evaluating proposed legislation. We'll establish priorities for state and federal legislation. We'll establish a legislative response team and designate an individual who may or may not be a member of the Board of Education to serve as our legislative representative. Also, briefly, we have the resolutions, MABE resolutions, which they use to inform their core values and their legislative platform. And I know Mrs. Williams serves on the resolution committee. These have not been affirmed by the entire MABE membership, statewide membership. But I don't know, Mrs. Williams, if you have any comments, anything on the resolutions that you feel should be brought forward at this time, please feel free to do so.
Only that the committee met and the strike-throughs new wording just reflects an attempt to update and make more current the continuing resolutions. Any suggestions that my colleagues may have, I will be happy to take down to the conference. The resolution committee will be meeting before the general meeting of the membership. And so if you have any suggestions as to additions or changes to what's here, please let me know.
And those would be handled as floor amendments to the resolutions that day in the business meeting.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. Thank you. Any questions about MABE resolutions that Mrs. Williams or I could answer? Okay, next in your packet, you'll see some projected, again, very open, moving, fluid calendar for the 2016 legislative session. You'll see today's work session reflected there. We'll be taking some of our decisions today forward to the 22nd meeting to vote on those, as we did last year. And then you'll see the first day of the 2016 session is January 13th. And as you move down, you'll see some other dates to be announced. My understanding, if you go down the fourth from the bottom, MABE's annual Legislative Day Luncheon is still very up in the air. They're saying mid-February. My understanding is today is the first day that the reservation calendar for rooms in the Capitol and for different legislators to sponsor these events opens today. So they'll be confirming a very specific date before much longer. Also, the Lobbying Coalition Day in Annapolis is tentatively scheduled for either the 4th or 5th of February. Last year, it happened on Wednesday, which happened to be the State of the Union address, and it really confused some of their events there, even though it was a productive day. So they're trying to go for the 5th, which is a Thursday, as their first choice. After that, you'll see the dates of interest for the General Assembly of Maryland, and then that basically takes us to the legislative core values that we've pretty much used for the last 3 sessions. And you'll see that on the very short page there where it mentions that our 3 core values: local control, concurrent, adequate, and equitable state funding, and mandates should be limited and fully funded by the state with supplemental funds. So if we start with that as a review and a starting point for discussion this morning as to whether those core values are still something that we support, do they need to be revised, enhanced? So any discussion on those? If I don't hear discussion, I'm assuming that we're all in favor of maintaining these as our core values, and we'll move those forward as part of our action item on the 22nd to support. And it certainly doesn't mean we can't discuss it again on the 22nd, but hopefully we can have a more in-depth discussion today if you feel it's required. Yes, Mrs. Harshman.
I had a question about local control, where it says continued governance authority for local boards of education to set educational policy and school budgets. I was wondering exactly what that would entail.
Just for everyone, Mrs. Harshman is on page 3 of the packet that includes the core values and legislative priorities, which is a couple pages forward. And at the top, it's letter B, local control. The Board of Education supports continued autonomy for local boards of education to adopt education policies that promote high standards for academic and fiscal accountability. Your question was pertaining to, help me again.
There were some things that were brought up, such as the start after Labor Day and the time for the morning start of school, and I was just wondering if that was included in this.
Yes, if you look a little bit further on, you'll see those on the back of that page. Those are in the legislative watch list.
Okay, that's where I had them marked. I'm sorry.
Yep.
Excuse me.
No, that's fine. That's why we're here, just to clarify and be sure we're aware of that. But those would all fall under local control.
Okay.
Further?
Yes, and the transfer of pensions, it was the transfer of pensions and the opposition to the school for starting at certain dates and for the time period. And I was just wondering if we had voted on these or how those came about. The pension, I wasn't sure. I remember that the state dumped it on the counties, but I wasn't sure how that comes about when we are considered state employees. And then I know that each time it's more and more, but I'm not really understanding, I guess, how we would have to pick that up. I know that several other suggestions were made about capping it because of Montgomery County's high retirement pay. And then the Labor Day, I wasn't sure if we voted on that or how we became supporters of not going along with the start after Labor Day, and the same with the school hours. I didn't know if we voted on that.
Can I take those separately?
Sure. Sure.
Okay, the first one on the pension cost, that happened 4 years ago.
Yes.
And that was prior to this legislative process that we're now using being in place. So I can't probably off the cuff explain how this board dealt with that 4 years ago. I would have to do some research. But the state took all normal cost, okay, and basically passed that down to the school system. But what they did for the first 4 years was to help us, it was phased in. So to help us handle that increase, money was being sent for the additional cost through the county. And if you remember, the budget we just passed included a little over $740,000 that was passed to the county, and the county put in our budget for that. Now we're at the point where now all of pension dollars, additional normal cost, would be absorbed through our maintenance of effort. In other words, our funding that we get. Any additional gap between what the state and what we then, because of pay raises or hiring additional employees, we all pay out of our own budget locally. Am I close to right? So that's where we stand, and that happens in 2017, which would be an upcoming budget. And I would say we've put this in here because our concern is the state needs to be aware that the costs they pass down to us, the revenues they pass down to help cover the cost, were based on actuarial numbers that were not accurate at this point.
Right.
So some of those numbers have increased, and the feeling is that we might have an opportunity to have that conversation. So by putting this in our watch list, it gives us that opportunity to make a statement of our position and be able to react to whatever may be coming. Does that help?
Yes, very much.
I
hope it works.
we all do. The school calendar and the post-Labor Day start were both items that we carried over from last year's priority, and that was something we all voted on to support these positions from last year.
Do we need to vote on these a second time with new members?
We'll be
or
voting on this entire
the whole
packet,
thing, so it won't be
including these.
individually, though.
It won't be, and I would suggest if there's any concern about, you could almost look at this as a consent agenda. If board members feel they'd like to pull 1 or 2 items out and vote separately, that's certainly a motion that would be entertained.
Okay,
Okay?
thank you.
Yep. Yes. Welcome, Mrs. Cade.
Thank you. That those do not say that this board, even if you wanted to, you could change your hours or change your calendar. But what those bills are trying to do is make you change them. And what local control keys is letting you decide whether you're going to change the hours and change the calendar. It doesn't say that you.
Right. Thank you.
And just to add on, I think we had done a survey, Dr. Wilcox helped me, that almost all of our high schools start at or after 8:30. So we're already doing a later start time, which is what the recommendation for that was statewide. Dr. Hardings, you had.
Yeah, just in terms of the positions we've taken that Mrs. Harshman mentioned, I think Mrs. Brightman's right. We did take that position last year, but now is the time to take it out if that's the will of the board. I mean, that's what a work session is for. So I think if an individual member sees something in here that he or she doesn't like, now's the time to say, I'd like to see if there's general agreement or majority agreement to take a particular item out. It's very easy to do that in a work session. It's much more difficult to do it in a board meeting. So I would invite anybody who, we just based this on what we did last year. So if anybody wants to change something, now's the time to do it.
Thank you. So just to go back to core values as a separate item, I'm assuming we're still okay with those 3 core values, which then inform our platform, which then informs our initiatives. So right now, general agreement, nodding of heads that we're okay with the 3 core values, our 3 base core values. Okay. Next, our legislative priorities, and you'll see that as we did last year, we've listed our priorities under those core values. So the core values inform those. So we're on the page with the 2016 core values and legislative priorities. Starts with letter A, adequate and equitable state funding, equity and funding, commission on education, finance, and equity, geographic cost. We can take any of those in any order. If we could handle the letter A first, that might be helpful. Everyone did have their coffee this morning? Mm-hmm. Okay, just checking. I'll just sort of offer a few things that might stimulate some conversation. The Geographic Cost of Education Index is a mandated review under the Thornton 2, or the adequacy review, which is about halfway completed. They have not started their review or sub-review of the geographic cost, but that is mandated. So we're basically supporting what is going to happen, but it never hurts to say it more than once and numerous times. And again, this is information when we're all in Annapolis, during the day in Annapolis. This is sort of something to help inform our conversations with legislators. Under the increased funding for PreK Education, if you'll notice the change, last year we had asked to be part of a pilot if there was some additional mandates coming down. At this point, nothing came forward except the year prior there was a PreK grant that did pass, and Washington County did apply and receive that grant. And I believe we're in the second year of a 4-year grant. Am I halfway correct? Yes.
We're halfway through it, yes.
And we're halfway through it. So we are still getting that money. So we took the pilot out and just saying that we are indeed moving ahead with expanding our PreK offering in Washington County. And you'll see the final statement that additional funding is needed to further expand existing programs and to facilitate the opening of the Funkstown Regional Learning Center. Something new that was put in as a recommendation is the next item, funding for Washington County Government's transportation program. We would like to suggest that we support the Board of County Commissioners in securing needed highway user revenues so that the county may allocate other available funds for educational and capital projects. This is a very, I think, productive conversation to have again this year. Last year, the county realized additional $132,000 in their highway user revenues, in the city received an additional 1.1. Now, I would say for the county, the 132,000 is a very small percentage of what they've lost. I think that was over a loss of over 10 million, but it's certainly in the right direction. So I think, again, that's something we could discuss here. That is new, so we want to be sure we're all in agreement on advocating with the county on this. Similar to how we advocated with the county on the disparity grant. And the first year of that, they shared half of that with us. And Mrs. Cade was instrumental in lobbying for that. Are okay with that one? We're going to sort of move on then. I think if we look down at the bottom of the exploration of new funding mechanisms should be explored for public school construction. In the final paragraph, that's just a repeat of the adequacy report that came out recently, asking for $2.5 billion over 10 years in a competitive grant process for smaller, innovative schools. That is in a separate item where the Speaker of the House requested that this report, which was part of the adequacy report, be finalized early and given out early. So there is some expectation, strictly speculation at this point, but that some legislation may be driven by that report. So again, this is a way of acknowledging that and giving us the ability to track this and have a voice on the issue. This is going to be a long hour, guys. Just keep on moving. Okay. Please, if anyone has comments, I'm okay. So we've finished really with A. We'll sort of stop at that point. Adequate and equitable state funding. Those are recommendations at this point. Anything any member would like to add or subtract? Okay, moving on to B, local control. I think Mrs. Harshman, you had brought up some issues. I believe we've answered your issues on that. Charter school, there was a big push last year to expand the charter school, Public Charter School Act. Many of those did not go forward in the final piece of legislation. The only real new item was that charter schools that have a proven 5-year track record, very effective education instruction, are allowed to then start working directly with MSDE rather than oversight of their local school system. But again, the suggestion is that the proponents of charter school will continue to chip away at that. Yes, Mrs. Fisher.
What determines very effective?
I don't have that in front of me. Ardith, do you know what the very effective, was it achievement, closing achievement gaps?
It involves achievement and definitely financial stability as well.
But achievement achieved are demonstrated by what? They don't have to take state tests, so how can
I don't really know.
you compare it to? And we don't know what their achievement scores mean, or
I can certainly get that information. I know that at this point, Washington County does not have a public charter in the county, so I'm sorry I didn't come prepared for that question.
Mrs. Bright, we can find that information. We'll provide it to the members of the board.
We'll give you that breakdown of that legislation.
because I just think that if moving them as this item proposes means less money for public schools, yet we have no control over their real academic achievement, then it's not appropriate or something I would want to support.
And if you see the reading, and I don't disagree with your statement, it says local boards must retain the sole authority to grant charters and to administer funding to charter schools. That's our statement, that's our position. So that would certainly cover, if that comes up again in discussion in Annapolis, this would cover that. Yes?
Does that mean, in addition to the 5 years, if they turn out to be financially and academically sound, that we still want control of them?
Right now, the law says we don't.
We don't. So is that what we're asking for there?
That we would like to continue sole control over charters within our county.
For the lifetime of the charter, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
It's a pretty broad statement.
Okay.
Did that help, Mrs. Fisher?
Yes and no, because that's local control, and
It is.
if it starts siphoning off state money, then it still affects us locally, but yet we'll not have direct control of it.
And how funding is probably, how charter schools are funded is probably the topic that will come up this year. Frederick has 3 charter schools, Baltimore has several, Anne Arundel, Prince George's, and the funding and how the funding passes with the child, or what portion goes, and what about special ed, and what about all the other costs for that child. So there are a lot of funding issues, and there's some talk about that becoming one of the topics this year. Mr. Ridenour.
I just was going to say, I mean, this statement is a broad statement. We want sole authority. The state has already taken action that chipped away at that, obviously, with the 5-year. I think the other thing we have to be a little bit concerned about and pay attention to is MSDE just appointed, or the governor just appointed five new state board members, one of which is one person who is a charter proponent, a big charter proponent. So I think we have to be very vigilant and watch how these play out at the state board level and obviously at the legislative level. And it also, to me, is problematic because to me it sends a little bit of a message that the governor is a proponent of charters. So, that's something, I mean, obviously he is. So I think we have to watch this. This is something we have to watch very carefully because it could be devastating if funding starts slipping away to charter schools in the state. It affects every school in the state, not just the ones that have charter schools, but everybody. So, yeah, I mean, I like the fact we still have the same language. This is what we believe to be the proper course. But I think we'll see efforts each and every year for a while to chip away at that local control.
I believe you're accurate. And the next one up, the voucher program, has been added this year. And I think we already have, through some, the General Assembly already gave $5.7 million in non-public school textbook program to private schools. There was another $4 million that was contingent on the GCEI being fully funded. Excuse me, I'm not supposed to say that. Geographic Cost of Education Index funded. So I don't know exactly what portion of that $4 million was finalized, and they've also added construction dollars in the non-public aging school program of $3.5 million. So each year a little more money has been going to private schools, and I think that, again, we're saying any expansion of the current programs should be opposed. The one thing that I think is of importance, both of those, the operating as well as the capital, they did add through a conference committee quite a few strings to those dollars so that any money that goes to private schools are still under Maryland's civil rights provisions prohibiting employment discrimination based on race, color, religion, ancestry, national origin, sex, age, marital status, sexual orientation, gender identity, or disability. So that is new based on last year's conference committee. So we've now gone through the 3 items recommended.
Are those?
Yes.
Maybe Ms. Kay knows or somebody does. Are those considered voucher programs? That's not what I think of when I think of a voucher program. I think of a program that provides money to a student that the student takes with them to a school of their choice. I mean, and I'm not saying that we shouldn't oppose these programs, but I don't consider it a voucher. It seems to me the use of that word voucher is a little well, I'll just say it doesn't, I'll leave it with what I said. It's not what I consider a voucher program to be. Is that a term of art of some sort in Annapolis that these are vouchers, or could we retitle this to something like we oppose public funds supporting private schools or something of that sort?
That would probably even be more accurate. It's a little broader in what it's saying, because the voucher programs that are proposed each year are for scholarships and so forth
Right.
into non-public schools, whereas this textbook money is not technically a voucher. So your wording may be more accurate in terms of defining what it is you want to cover.
I would just hate for somebody to see these core values and see voucher programs and misunderstand what it is, what the position is that we're taking.
So a recommendation for retitling would be transfer of private dollars, public dollars to private schools?
That,
Does that somewhat capture?
then I think, yeah, any well, it'd be more than just the title,
and then
because
take the voucher out and say any expansion. Would you like us to rework that entire section?
I think any expansion of the current program of public funding for private schools.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely.
Is everyone with us on that? With that change, Mrs.
Yeah,
Harshman?
can you read what you have?
And roughly, basically, we would change the title from voucher program to something like public funding of private schools or programs, and then in the explanation, any expansion of the current public funding of private schools should be opposed.
Okay, good.
There may be a comma or something needed there, but roughly we're there. Everyone in agreement on that?
Well, I'll just to express, I don't know if my fellow board members agree with me, but I'm opposed not only to expansion, but even what's already spent.
I hear that. I guess on this one, I think what's already there is there. I'm not sure we can go backwards on that one. So I think we're looking forward on it. But if you feel the need to make a statement of principle and there's majority concurrence, we can do that.
Well, I wasn't really expecting a majority concurrence. I just wanted to make my feelings known.
Yes, ma'am. Loud and clear. Thank you. Mrs. Harshman.
Actually, I would support that, but is there some way that we can just phrase that we are opposed to public funds being used to support private schools?
And the expansion of current programs, we could add that on as...
No, that would just be period.
We could. I think we may want to speak to the specific issue that we think may be going forward. That may cover it, but I'm not sure it hurts to say and any future expansion.
But if if it would go through as no support for public funding of private schools, then there would be no expansion.
That's one possible. Yes, Mr. Ridenour.
Well, no, I just was saying that it depends on how you want to. I have no problem with taking a stand or, in principle. I think we got to be careful because, there are times we spend our own public money for private placements for students in special needs. So, I mean, if you write it too broadly, there are students that we take care of, we would no longer be able to use the funds to do that. So I think, pardon me for saying, but I think Dr. Harding's statements and even Mrs. Fisher's, I can go along with either one. I think just we have to be careful how we write it. Future expansion, there's always a chance that even if we don't want any public funding, if something gains traction, sometimes you have to limit the damage as it's moving forward. Try to cut it off. We may not be able to cut it off and say zero funding, but we may be able to cut it off at a point that it is not damaging, to us and to other school systems. I think you just have to be careful how you want to write this.
Could we work on that? Yes, Ms. Fisher.
Instead of saying private schools, you could spell out charter and or religious schools. I don't know if there's anything else, any other category that.
What I was thinking just in hearing comments would be maybe to take charter and the revised voucher program and slide over and then maybe put a heading that says, in general, we oppose public funding for private schools, and the charter and the expansion would be two examples. Might be a way of clarifying and helping everyone. Does that?
I want to avoid, based on what Mr. Ridenour is saying, I think perhaps we should avoid private schools because some of these the special ed placements are private schools, though they're not charters and they're not religious. And I believe I'm hearing, that's what I'm hearing, that he's afraid that it would also perhaps take away the money for those special needs students that truly need
I think
placement.
That's mandated, but I do take the point. May we work on that and get that back? And again, we will finalize all of this on the 22nd, and we'll have some better language back to you by then. Is that?
Both of those, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Based on, that's the end of what we have under local control. Any additions or subtractions or other revisions? Knowing we're going to work on the third one. Yes, Ms. Harshman.
I have a slight problem with the last paragraph under mandated post-Labor Day start.
Could you hold that thought? And could we do number C and then we'll go to the watch list, which is where,
Okay.
Do you mind if we do that?
No.
And then we can decide if you feel like that needs to go somewhere or
All right.
how you would like to see that worded. Thank you. So letter C, mandates should be limited and fully funded by the state. That's a very broad, that has come to our rescue on numerous issues. Any changes to that statement? Okay, under that you'll see local initiatives, and these were just two recommendations. I think everyone is aware of our request to seek relief from the fuel tax that the local board must pay to the state of Maryland. Mr. Trotta, what is the update? We've sent the letter to the Attorney General.
We have not yet requested an opinion of the Attorney General's
Have not.
office. That is in process, but we've been in discussions with the State Comptroller's office to see if they might join us in submitting such an opinion, and they have declined to do so. So we are proceeding to have further discussions with the State Comptroller's office, and we will be submitting a request for a legal opinion to the Attorney General's office.
So again, this is an item at this point. We don't know if that might move into legislation, if it might be something that, we're still in some steps prior to legislation. But this is something that I feel we may want to have on our list, so when we're in Annapolis, we can discuss it and advocate. What is the amount of money we're talking about at this point?
We anticipate a cost savings of $100,000 per year if we were not required to pay this tax.
Okay. So is everyone all right with leaving that on? Next would be to seek state educational funding to extend academic opportunities to school-age students who are not enrolled in the Washington County Public Schools. Dr. Wilcox, would you like to speak to that?
This is simply allow a fractional tuition charge for students or families who want to take advantage of some of our educational options. For example, if a family had a high school student who wanted to take an advanced calculus class, they're prohibited from doing that right now. Allow them to do it, pay for the opportunity to do it. If marching band or some other activity that you could provide as a homeschool parent, they would have the opportunity to do that. So it's an opportunity for us to pursue fractional tuition.
Question, Mrs. Fisher.
Is this counterproductive to our attempts to avoid having to build a new high school by our boutique schools, the academic hub, and so on, because this might be putting more kids back into our schools, especially our high schools?
I don't necessarily see it that way.
I mean, I have no idea how many, if something like this were passed, I have no idea how many students would take advantage of it. If it's just, a dozen across the county, that's one thing. But if it's 120 across the county, it's something else.
I think our experience, how frequently have you had a request for this in the past?
That's not true.
We had some. It's not true. We actually had some conversations with Grace Academy because they have a calculus teacher at the time. Talked to them about it. We've also had a number of folks who have said that they would like to come participate in some of our extracurricular activities. I don't think the number would be astronomical, but it would be something we have to watch. And quite honestly, I think that's a good problem to have. Like the store, if you have too many customers, that's a good problem to have.
Mrs. Williams.
In listening to Dr. Wilcox, when I read this, it says certain academic classes, and yet Dr. Wilcox is speaking to extracurricular activities, sports and whatnot. So my question was why we would limit it to academics. Why not art, music, physical education, and sports? So with the wording, I had a question about that, limiting it to academics as it appears here. And then I was just wondering what the benefit would be to our students and to the system. This would be something that would be beneficial to parents of students and the students in private and parochial schools who would want to take advantage of our course offerings. I see that. and there is the tuition benefit. But would the tuition that we would charge cover all the costs that would be incurred by our system in order to make these offerings? And if not, wouldn't that then be in contradiction to what we're saying about keeping public dollars in public schools for public school students and not private schools?
Well, I think we can come up with a formula for fractionated tuition. I actually view marching band as an academic pursuit. I don't think that the state athletic guidelines would allow kids to participate on our football teams or baseball teams, things like that. I think that's but art classes are academic classes. Band is academic. It's really the traditional school day
That you're saying?
This is one of those things where I think it's good for our families. I think it's good for our kids. I do think there's a value that some of our kids would experience by having kids who are otherwise very talented academically or perhaps gifted in terms of performance classes sitting side by side with some of our kids. And I don't know how big an issue this would be. It's really just a discussion starter for us.
Is there a precedent for this? I mean, does this happen somewhere? Do we know of other districts where they have
I think
opened
we
things
would be
to
the only ones in the state, to my knowledge.
any other states or
I think we're one of the few. This is,
that's entertaining this?
that's even thinking about this, unless you know of,
Minnesota, I think.
Minnesota.
First of all, I think they have wide open. You can go to any school district you want.
open enrollment, yeah.
But I don't know what they do with their charter or their homeschool.
Mrs. Fisher.
I think Mrs. Williams made another point that suddenly kind of opened my eyes. This is actually diametrically opposed to what we said in the voucher and charter schools item. It's public dollars for private school students.
Dr. Hardings.
I'll claim this one because I sort of brought it up in our initial brainstorming. One of the reasons I suggested it is sort of exactly the issue that you're bringing up, which is I think we have to stop looking at our high school, particularly our high school kids, as our kids, not our kids. Colleges don't do that. HCC doesn't do that. If you go to HCC and you take a class at HCC, you take another class at some other school, they charge tuition for the courses that you take. They don't require that you be a full-time student, come here for 15 credit hour load or whatever it is, in order to qualify to be a student there. I think as our high schools are evolving, high schools are headed that direction as we talk about internships for students, apprenticeships. We have students who spend half their days on our campus, half their days on HCC's campus. We have some of our students who don't spend any of their days on our campus. And I think as we try to provide the service we provide to the community and realize the way that the delivery of instruction is changing, particularly in high school, I'd like to be able to say to the homeschool group that may not have a good alternative for teaching AP Physics to say, come on into our schools, we'll teach you. Just the way HCC says you can come to our school as long as you meet the prerequisites and pay the tuition. That's the way I think high school education should go moving forward, and so that we can break down this sort of artificial barrier. No, it's not artificial, but this barrier that exists between these are our kids, public school kids, those are not our kids because they're not public school kids. I think we're here to serve all the kids in the county as we can. And by this fractionated tuition, I think we start to create a culture in the high schools where we're serving the individual needs of kids, not putting kids into a box. So that's why I suggested it.
I agree with you except for one tiny little thing. When you said, HCC said, as long as you can get here and you pay the tuition, this is saying the state would pay the tuition, which is taking state dollars again, possibly away from public schools.
I guess I don't understand that.
Not following that either.
I think she's referencing the funding mechanism.
HCC, the student's paying his or her own tuition.
And the state is paying a good bit, too, to support that student,
Because they're supported by state dollars.
as is the county.
Mrs. Harshman.
You were talking about the student's parents paying for the student to come to school, correct?
Yes.
Just like we charge
That would be
tuition
like a
for
tuition.
out-of-county and out-of-state students
Okay, I just
right
wanted
now.
to clarify that, but high school is a whole different animal from college, and my concern is that a homeschooled student may be a very bright student and wants to go into AP English, let's say, since I'm familiar with that, and chooses the school that that student wants to go to. So the student chooses a school that is perhaps has a high-performing AP English class and brings the scores up for that school. Isn't that sort of selecting your where you want to go to school, and we don't allow our other students to do that? For instance, even if we're missing a class in some schools, our students do not have the opportunity to transfer to another school in order to pick up that class. And that happened to my son as a student at South High. So I find this very selective in allowing one group of students to choose and pick and the rest of ours not to.
I do know we have a special permission process where students apply, and if there are seats available and the individual qualifies.
There's nothing in the legislation that I'm proposing that would exempt anybody from the other regulations and policies that exist in our school system. I would assume that if a student in Pleasant Valley who was homeschooled decided that they wanted to take a class in a public school, they'd have to go to Boonesboro.
How about if the school did not offer that? And
Then
the
they
student- And the student only wanted a particular class?
Then they would, I would assume, be in the same boat as anybody else.
Well,
As
that's
far as
not-
availability
That
of-
actually isn't the same boat, because to take a class at another high school, let's say, you have to enroll in that school. You can't say, I'm going to take English at South High, and then I want to take AP biology at North High. You
Then I would say-
cannot alternate.
Then I would say let's find a way to solve that problem, not deny opportunities to other kids.
Well, I think we should solve that problem before we offer it to other kids, personally.
Okay, yes, Dr. Wilcox.
Well, I think one of the things that we're struggling with is we're kind of on the forefront of some systematic changes that are happening, and I tend to agree right now that providing opportunity is where we ought to probably err if we're going to err. I know that we have expanded the use of blended courses this year through Apex Learning, which means that a lot of our kids will be taking courses online with a dedicated Washington County teacher who's assisting them about 20% of their time. So there will be kids who are taking original credit there in a very short period of time. I will also say that as we begin to take a careful look at, as we have this year, at our AP courses, you will likely have me recommend at some time that we expand the opportunity for kids to transfer and move in between schools to take advantage of some of our best teachers. Clearly there is a great discrepancy right now in the outcomes that kids are getting in some AP courses versus other AP courses. And I can't at this time say, is that a function of the academic stimulation in there between and amongst kids, or is it the result of the differentiation in teaching and teachers? But I can clearly tell you right now that there is a very clear statistical correlation between kids' success over the years with some teachers versus other teachers. I have to be very careful with that because, again, the student group changes, so you can't hold all the variables careful. But I think statistically, we can make a case that the probability is stronger for you on the AP exams had you had the experience at certain schools versus other schools. We're delving into that a lot more deeply right now, but my point would simply be this. I think there's going to come a day when kids are in fact going to pick and choose not only the school but the specific teacher that they want for a subject. It may not happen here for 5 to 10 years, but it is going to happen, and it's probably happening in some places right now, where parents and kids are kind of voting with their feet, if you will, as to which school they attend. So I think this would be a nice first step for us to experiment and kind of learn some things. But again, you have to have a community that's ready for it.
Okay, we're a little close on time. I don't want to rush anyone, and we still have the watch list. I guess and again, we're not going to vote on anything, but I think it may be helpful to get a nod of the head on these initiatives. And if there's anything a board member would like to add to this list for our group consideration. Is that a nothing else to add or a don't support?
That's a don't support the second one.
Okay.
Which is what?
Is there a general agreement to take this forward to the 22nd? Do you want to pull that one out? I need a little guidance here, folks. Let's start with number 1. Are we okay with keeping the initiative to seek relief from the fuel tax?
Yes.
Are we all on board with that one? Okay. Number 2, the fractional tuition. Are we on board with that?
No.
I'm seeing a negative, a negative, a negative. I see 4 negatives. So I think
I'd like to see it investigated, but apparently that's not the will, so.
all right, so that will not move forward to the 22nd. All right, moving on to the legislative watch list. And I think, Mrs. Harshman, you had something about the post-Labor Day start. Yes.
At last, right?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, and it's just the last paragraph. It concerns me, it always concerns me, when a test date drives anything. And when it drives the calendar, I think it speaks volumes. The importance of the tests should certainly not be the end-all for our scheduling of classes start and finish. And there are other counties in the state that start after Labor Day and seem to be able to manage that. And they seem to be able to manage that. And while some people seem to also think that this only affects Ocean City, and the truth of the matter is, I know as a teacher, there were many, many, many students who, upon leaving for the summer, went to Ocean City or someplace and worked, or they went to swimming pools and worked. And closing the swimming pools or the ocean before Labor Day was kind of a unspoken idea, because the students were not there to help with the things that they did all summer. And sometimes they couldn't get jobs because they knew, the employer knew, that they had to be back before Labor Day, and they needed them till Labor Day. So I'm thinking that this is just kind of a something that we should not be going against, because I do feel that it's worth the idea of allowing Labor Day to start the school year, and instead of letting the test drive when we start, which apparently is what we're doing.
Okay, my response to that is this is only on a watch list status
And I
right
understand
now.
that.
We don't know if it will become legislation. It's just, again, I think everyone has seen Comptroller Franchot starting to make comments and other individuals. But again, this is just on a watch list.
Right.
And so I guess my question on your statement is, do you see this moving off the watch list, one, and two, changing the wording? What are you recommending?
I agree that it should be on the watch list because it is coming up, and I think there's going to be a hard push for it. And I think what we need to do is maybe, like I said, alter the wording in this to just indicate that we need perhaps to do more study on this and find out exactly how it's going to affect us as a county, not how it's going to affect us in relation to the test, more in relation to the date of the start of school and what that does to the summer for our students and for our parents. And I know that with that comes an earlier start for sports and band and everything else because they have to be ready because school starts much earlier. So I just think that some of that has to be investigated so that when the opportunity comes, we can actually state what our county feels as opposed to maybe what we as board members feel and see how it plays out within the county.
Okay, Mr. Ridenour.
There is nothing in the law or in our policy that mandates we start August 15th or August 20th or August 30th or after Labor Day. We can do that as a board and as a system. Personally, the tests are there, and it is in the best interest of our kids to get them as much time prior to that test as we can get them. We have no control over AP tests. We may have influence at the state level on some of the tests that are given, that are state mandated, but AP are set by the college board, and they are early. And starting after Labor Day would cost our students somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 to 3 weeks of work prior to the AP test being administered. Whether or not we start at Labor, I personally think that in my lifetime, we will be in some modified schedule where we go year-round. I don't think we're going to be able to, if pre-K is mandated, we're going to have to find space, and I think space is going to be as a result of rotating schedules. So I'm not certain that, the old farmer school schedule, which, had students off in the summer so they could work on the farms, is going to stick around, 20 or 30 more years. I think it's a dinosaur. I think sooner or later we're going to see changes in scheduling. So personally, I just want us to have, and I don't care how it reads, I don't want it mandated. I don't want that coming from the state.
The local
I
flexibility.
want local flexibility, local control on schedules and other elements of what we do here in Washington County, because we are looking out for our kids. And that's, to me, that's the most important thing. What is going to work best for our kids?
Dr. Hart.
I too want local control over the calendar. If we're going to let the state already dictates a number of things about the calendar, but if they're going to dictate this, then I wonder what's next. I don't want our calendar driven by testing either, although it's a reality we have to deal with. And I would point out that when we discussed adopting our calendar about 8 months ago, we heard from a number of board members and a number of individuals who are on the calendar committee how important it was to consider the testing schedule when we're considering spring break. So I'm not sure which carries the day. I think sometimes the arguments we make are based on the outcome that we're looking for. I think the board itself needs to retain control over this, and that's why I oppose any legislation that would mandate the start of school.
Any further discussion, and we'll try to reach what I think is sort of a general agreement on this. Okay, first of all, a nodding of heads for keeping this on the watch list. Okay. I think at this point, so that we're all on the same page, we need to know where the board is on either supporting post-Labor Day start or not. So I'll just ask, is there a support to maintain the position of opposition for post-Labor Day mandate statewide?
That's the key word.
Mandate.
The mandate.
I oppose the mandate.
You oppose the mandate, which is the wording we have here. Looks like we have 4. I'm not seeing, so looks like we have maybe 4.5. So anyway, we're there. There's a couple sort of maybe unclears. So at this point, it will stay on the watch list, and our position at this point would be in opposition to a state-mandated post-Labor Day, a mandated post-Labor Day start date. Am I saying that right? I'm getting it backwards. All right. We've come to the end of the agenda there. I believe, just to review, we're about 6 minutes over, and I apologize. We've completed the core value, priorities, and initiatives. On that one, very quickly, I'd like to discuss the composition of the legislative response team. By way of policy BJ, we have the president of the board, we have the superintendent, and I've lost my BJ. Excuse me, I want to get it exactly right. Will comprise of the Board of Education president, at least one other board member, the superintendent, the chief legal counsel, and the designated legislative representative. In no case will more than 3 board members be appointed. So at this point, I'd like to entertain a recommendation for the legislative response team for 2016 session. Superintendent's a given. Mr. Trotta, you have no choice. The president at this point has no choice, so we're down to at least one other board member. Somebody would like to make a recommendation?
Dr. Hardings.
Excuse me?
Dr. Hardings is still interested in continuing. I would recommend
Okay.
the vice
Dr.
president.
Harding's name, and we can do, that's at least one, and we could have one other under the policy if there's another individual interested in serving. No volunteers.
I would be willing to attend if you need someone at any time, If the two,
Informally,
yes, yes, that would be.
I'm sorry, I wasn't able to hear
I'm
what
sorry.
Mr. Ridenour said.
I said I would be willing to serve in an emergency.
Informally. He
Yeah.
didn't want his name put on formally. Okay. So we have general agreement. Again, we'd be voting on this on the 22nd. We're good with that. All right. And then moving on to the individual to serve as the Board of Education's legislative representative. And we won't ask Mrs. Cade to leave the room during the deliberation, but Mrs. Cade would be serving in that position again, and we would need to affirm that on the 22nd. Do we have shaking of heads here? Okay, very good. We'll move that forward. All right. That does bring us now to the end of the agenda. Again, I apologize for being about 9 minutes over. Any additional questions or comments and what the next step is? You'll see some of this cleaned up and sent out to you in preparation for the 22nd consideration. Okay. Thank you very much. We'll meet in closed session. I'm not sure we'll have time for an agenda committee meeting, but let's see if we can. Is Boyd here?
We don't, and Mr. O'Meally has another commitment, so we need to start on time.
Got it. All right. So we'll do the agenda committee afterwards or during lunch, if that's all right.